Ready to start?
Sure.
Okay, so who are you? Just give a brief introduction for the audience.
Sure. My name's DeCelle. I think I'm here because I'm a father of a former up until this past season. He played his last game in June of 2025, so not that long ago. Father of a D1 baseball athlete who started with one of the places he started was with the Admirals organization. I am currently a labor and employee relations specialist with Recology, which is kind of like was the waste management company for San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. I basically interview people all day, but not for the same reason you're doing your interviews. It's usually bad stuff. So I'm doing investigations on employee wrongdoing for the most part. That's me.
How did your family get involved in travel baseball, and did your son play any other sports before getting involved with baseball?
He did. He played travel basketball as well. And as a matter of fact, before we knew Dyron and his son Kobe as a baseball entity at all, we actually played on a basketball. My son, when I say we, my son played on a city basketball team, city of Vacaville basketball team, and Kobe was on that team, and Dyron coached, and didn't really think much of it. He seemed cool and stuff like that, and then Kenny, my son, he played travel basketball for many years, probably up until he was maybe 13, 14. So almost as long as he played travel baseball, he played travel basketball. He played on his high school team, and in fact was the captain of the varsity basketball team for a year when he was only a junior. It was in between his junior and senior years that he committed to Santa Clara University to play baseball, and then didn't go back to the basketball team after that as a senior because he was concerned. Basketball is just before baseball season, and he was concerned that he might get hurt, and it was a very important year for him. This is a decision that he's regretted for ever since, just not playing that final year of basketball in high school. But yeah, he absolutely played basketball, as you can see by that experience. And there is no question in my mind that those experiences and that athleticism, that basketball athleticism, helped him in baseball and the sport of baseball. One of the things that I've seen as we've kind of grown up in all these different travel sports and just kind of having a view of youth sports and how that transitions into college sports, one thing that it's kind of saddened me is the trend that fewer and fewer kids are doing multiple sports. They specialize very early in a sport, and it almost seems necessary because the competition's so tough at even the youngest levels. For example, my daughter, whose practice I'm at right now, she's in 8th grade. She plays at her middle school in Vacaville, and they had it's like 60 or 70 girls try out for the volleyball team, and my daughter made it in part because she's already at age 13 has already had 4 seasons of travel volleyball under her belt. But it's kind of sad where someone can't even get into a middle school volleyball team without having years of experience in that sport. So it's kind of a sad state of youth sports that like so many kids are having to or feel like they have to specialize in a sport so early, whereas our experience, that really helped Kenny get recruited, and there was several other schools um, that were interested in him and stated the coaches stated that was one of the things that really interested um, them about him as an athlete was that the fact that he played basketball too, and that he was the captain of the basketball team, and how that translates onto the baseball field. So it's just kind of a sad thing to see these days. It's not very, it's more and more rare.
What were the biggest differences that you noticed, especially having seen the baseball side and now seeing the volleyball side with your daughters, in terms of travel ball organizations, and then focusing more on the baseball side with the Admirals and what they kind of did throughout?
You asked me to compare and contrast what I've seen with volleyball and travel ball basketballs.
Yes, just kind of the travel ball organizations, and then specifically what either the travel organizations that your daughters played for or are playing for right now, and like the Admirals are doing in terms of like other organizations.
Okay, sure. Well, just to give you a little more context, I'm here with my 13-year-old daughter, but I have a 21-year-old daughter who plays collegiate volleyball right now at Pacific Union College in just above Healdsburg. Actually, my wife is going to see that game right now, so that's why she's not around right now. She's at her game. So we've seen both sides, like all the way to the very end. There are definitely different levels of competition, both in volleyball and baseball, like the have and have-nots. You definitely see some clubs have the invites to certain tournaments, and this goes for both sports. Some teams have the invites to go to certain tournaments, and others don't. When the Admirals first started years ago, in a little more context, my son Kenny was on the very first Admirals team there ever was. There was literally just one team, not the great organization, the large organization you see today. When we started, it was because Dyron was a coach for a different club, and he was basically kind of like the operations manager. And at some point, him and the owner of that club kind of had a falling out. Really, at the end of the day, Dyron was doing all the work, and this guy was getting all the credit. And Dyron's a hard worker, and he's got his own ideas. And one day after a tournament that I believe we won, actually, these kids were probably 9, 10, I don't know, 9, 10, or 11, somewhere in there. He took the entire team aside and said, "Hey, I'm going to break off into my own club. I'm not telling anybody here that they have to come with me. It's totally up to your choice. I can't guarantee you that you're going to get any refunds from the old club. I'm just letting you know, hey, I'm going to start my own thing." And everybody on that team switched, and we became the Admirals. Everybody, maybe one didn't, but that just kind of goes to show like the kind of leadership that Dyron has, and you already know, his leadership. We all went with him, and we became the Admirals. My little claim to fame is, I don't know if you love the Admirals colors or not, but that was me. That was all me. He'll even tell you that was me. He wanted the colors to be like turquoise and blue or something like that. Or I'm like, Dyron, no, we can't do that. We gotta. So you have me to thank for the colors of the Admirals. Anyway, so at first, when we first started getting going, there are certain large tournaments, especially as the kids start getting into high school, where our college coaches are going to be at, and start looking to recruit kids. And at the beginning, the Admirals were not invited to those tournaments. Of note, there's a large tournament in Arizona every year. The Admirals had never received an invite. As Kenny was getting a little deeper and things were starting to get a little more serious, and he was starting to get a few coaches' eyes, there were coaches that came to him and said, "Hey, I want to see you at the Arizona tournament." And we end up having to go to a friend of ours club's, NorCal, which is another large, prestigious youth baseball club in California, Rob Bruno's club. Rob Bruno's club has been around forever. They're huge. They're well known by college coaches. They had all the invites. We were lucky enough to get on one of Rob's teams to go to the Arizona tournament, and where he got a few more eyes on him, including the coach who would eventually recruit him to the University of San Francisco when at the time he was the recruiting coach for Fordham University, which is in New York. So it's just funny how things happen like that. But so Dyron wasn't happy with that decision. Dyron, hey, we got to go to another club. We were still a part of the Admirals, but we had to go put on another uniform for a little while so that we could participate in those tournaments. That's not a problem anymore. Admirals have certainly grown over the years. They get to any tournament they want to get into. Dyron's become well known, but at the time when we were still just a young club, with there was still only like a handful of clubs in the Admirals. They just weren't there yet. And I remember talking to Dyron and kind of advising him, hey, this is the vision that we need to have for the Admirals going forward. In order for us to make it as a club, in order for you to continue to get good athletes, we need to get these tournaments, and recruiting is important for a club, to get the best athletes and show up to these tournaments and do well and start to get a name for yourself. Start to develop relationships with coaches on his own, college coaches on his own. These are, relationships that Rob Bruno at NorCal had well established over the years. At first, Dyron was he didn't want to hear all this stuff at first, but I kept talking to him. I know all this sounds like bragging, like I'm the one who freaking showed the Admirals what to do. That's not the case. I mean, Dyron's the guy that's put in the work, and he's got the drive. But he'll even tell you, like, these stories that I'm telling you are like 100% the way things went down. And it started for him to start to see like the bigger picture of what it takes to be a force in youth baseball, and to like get your name out there, and all the networking that it takes. Because just like the business world and just life in general, it really does take networking. It takes networking to be successful. Same things I'm seeing on the volleyball side. This younger daughter and the older daughter have done. We try not to be like quote unquote like club jumpers or anything like that. But as you gain experience, as your athlete, as your small athlete begins to develop their skills, you hope to graduate to these better clubs that I'm talking about. The ones that have these established relationships, and you definitely see like where we're practicing right now, it's Absolute Volleyball Club in San Rafael. Is probably the top club in Northern California. She didn't start there. She started at Club Solano, which is a really tiny little, relatively small club in Solano County, mostly out of Fairfield. And then last year she was at Club Omni, which is in Sacramento, a much larger club, a much better club than Solano. And on Saturday, she's going to be trying for Absolute, and we think she's got a great chance of making their most competitive 14-year-old team. Or even if not that, then she's definitely going to make the twos team, which is still even better than the last club she was at, which still went to nationals and all that stuff. So what you see at Absolute is on their walls, you see every year, 8 girls from the club who are going to a who's who of colleges, Stanford and Baylor and USF and all these clubs. They put them up on the wall, and I swear it's at least 8 a year. That's the kind of club you want to be in. That tells you this is the place that I need to be to get the right set of eyes on me as I grow into an athlete. And that's where we're at right now. It's taken Darwin, I think, some time to get there, but and he's still gonna keep getting better and better and better at this, and talking to coaches and developing that relationship. That's what it takes. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, and then kind of, you touched on it a little bit, but kind of going more specifically into showcases, camps, and tournaments, how did that exposure help for your son to be recruited?
That's another great thing. I did have my son go to quite a few showcases, and again, I mentioned that some of these coaches that said, "Hey, I want to see you at the Arizona tournament," and those coaches came from these showcases that I took had to drag his ass to, because he didn't really want to go all the way down to LA to go to Chapman University or wherever these showcases were at. When he was like a freshman or sophomore in high school, he didn't really want to go, but I almost forced him to go. And there's two reasons to go to a showcase, in my opinion. One is just to be seen, if you're good enough to be seen, right? But the other thing is to be comfortable in front of coaches. And it's very important for kids to try to develop relationships with coaches and get to know them and talk to them. That was something my son always struggled with. Despite my pleading, go talk to this guy or talk to this guy, call this guy up, or whatever. And some kids are better at it than others. But again, this showcase I took him to so many years ago when he was way in high school, again, ended up being the same coach that he played for as a head coach at USF, as a 22-year-old. You don't burn bridges, right? You don't burn bridges. And also another odd connection was, I didn't know it at the time, but the guy who was running some of the showcases, Showball in this case, ended up being a dad for to his daughter, who my youngest daughter played on a volleyball team with years later. And when Kenny left, when he graduated from Sonoma State in 2024, and he still wanted to play baseball, this guy helped reach out to that same coach and get all this stuff done, because he knew Kenny was a baller. He knew me from volleyball, and this guy was the guy that ran the showcases. It's all these little connections that can really help a kid get to where they want to go. Never burn bridges in this business. You never know. what's going to happen like years later. Showcases, they're important. They're important.
And then that kind of leads us to a little bit of a bigger question and more about the financial side of stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you feel the cost of travel ball and also for you travel volleyball is justified by the experience as well as the outcome?
Okay, yeah. All right. So it is expensive. Mm-hmm. It's very expensive. My wife and I have been blessed to be able to afford it. We're not rich. I mean, like we don't live lavishly. We don't drive really fancy cars. I ain't got a Porsche or a Mercedes or anything like that. I drive a Jeep Wrangler. My wife drives a Highlander. I mean, nice cars, but not like fancy, right? My wife's a brigadier general in the California Army National Guard. I already mentioned what I do. I'm also a retired lieutenant colonel from the California National Guard. We were lucky that we could afford it, but we did so like we did afford it, but it also meant that we didn't live lavishly. Right? We could have afforded like much nicer things if we weren't taking our kids to travel ball, and that goes for volleyball too. I mean, we have literally been all over these United States for volleyball and baseball. We've been to New York. We've been to Texas. We've been to Arizona. We've been to Nevada. We've been to Florida. We've been to Washington. We've been all these different, Kansas, Indianapolis. I mean, I can go on and on. Like, and what we end up doing is we end up making these like our family vacations. Like, hey, Kenny's got a tournament in Florida at Disney World with the Admirals, which didn't happen when they were young, and we just made that like our family vacation. We all went to Disney World with the Admirals and had a great time, right? It's super expensive, but here's to answer your question though. Was it worth it? Yes, because college athletes, they have to work harder than everybody else. Mm-hmm. They have to stay more focused than everybody else. They have to stay out of trouble. They can't go drinking and driving. They can't stay out all night and party. They're making sacrifices on a daily basis just to be able to make sure that they can compete on the weekends and on the weekdays, go to practice and get all their homework done. I am proud to say Kenny, as a graduate student last year, got all A's. He got all A's at Sonoma State. He was the male athlete of the year at Sonoma State the year he graduated. And that was dually because he was obviously a great athlete, but because his academics were there as well, right? It keeps these kids out of trouble. Travel sports keeps kids out of trouble. It keeps them from doing whatever the heck else a lot of these kids do, and to not stay focused on school and to do drugs and screw off. I'm not saying my kids have never had fun or like have never had a drink or something. They can do all that stuff, but they know how to do these things responsibly. They're not drinking and driving. They're not doing stupid stuff. And I've seen this. I've seen other kids that they grew up with that kind of at some point left travel sports, and they to this day, they're like early 20s. They don't know what even they're doing with their lives. They're just kind of floating out there. They don't have degrees. My son had his master's degree at age 22. Like, sorry.
No, you're good.
That's incredible. You know what I mean? Like, it's an incredible accomplishment. I'm not saying that to brag, but just to say, like, it puts that kind of focus or it can put that kind of focus on a kid. I've also seen kids go to Cal. You might know a certain admiral that I'm talking about that went to Cal, and he ended up taking like Rubik's Cube classes or something at Cal, and he ended up playing. All through the same age as Kenny. They were always the same age coming up. But he ended up with he did end up with a degree, but just a bachelor's degree. Really didn't really stay focused on that stuff. But even with that, right, it's still an accomplishment over most kids their age to be like 22 or something and have a bachelor's degree, right? Most kids of those age they're still trying to figure it out. So travel sports, I think, is it worth it? Absolutely. It's worth it to keep these kids, keep them straight, keep them focused. Kenny was on a full ride scholarship last year at USF, which was I don't know, $70,000 or something like that. We got a bill last week for where they were just closing up their bill to us or whatever. It was like $800. So he got his master's degree for basically $800. I mean, come on, you can't really beat that. So now, are you gonna get every cent back that you put into it in scholarship money, athletic scholarship money? Probably not. That'll probably never happen. That happens very rarely where kids can get full rides stuff. And that's another thing that's odd about what's going to be happening especially in college baseball, where there's this year is the first year where basically you can have as many college baseball scholarships as your school can afford. That wasn't the case up until this coming season right now. Prior to that, they could have 11.5 scholarships or something like that for an entire team. What are you going to see with that type of environment? You're going to see the schools that can afford to get the best players and give them NIL money, as much as NIL money as they can afford, and as much scholarship money as they can give them, versus schools that their athletic directors are barely hanging in there. Baseball doesn't make a ton of money in those smaller schools, and it's going to be harder and harder for them to be going forward, which is really sad, especially for West Coast Conference teams, like St. Mary's, right? You guys don't have a big baseball field. My son played on that field. It's not a huge field. People aren't going all the way up the windy ass road to go see a baseball game. You know what I mean? It takes a while. St. Mary's is not making a ton of money off baseball. It costs them money, and they can't compete with. They're not going to be able to compete with schools like Gonzaga, who, and I'm just using West Coast Conference teams. Even as great as St. Mary's did last year, they did great. They beat us in the playoffs. But we did beat them in the series for the season, just so you know.
Yeah. It was a rough one.
Yeah. But you guys beat us in the playoffs. But but going forward, it's going to be harder and harder if teams like Gonzaga can spend more money and spend more money than St. Mary's. You see it in basketball, same thing, right? You're going to see West Coast Conference teams, the smaller ones, fall off even more, unfortunately, I think, going forward. It's going to be the have and have-nots. Kind of sad. I wish, even if people say it wasn't fair to the athletes, it's sad to see from a wider perspective, I think, more as a fan in a way. Hope that answers some of your question.
Yes.
I don't know if I heard it, but...
And now kind of going into the Admirals specifically, how would you have described the team culture of the Admirals, and how did it help with the development of your son in baseball?
That's a great question. And I think one thing that Dyra did very early on was emphasize those academics. emphasize team, emphasize family, emphasize being good citizens. They do a lot of, or did, probably still do. I'm not around the club as much as I used to, obviously. And he still goes in to train every once in a while just for the hell of it, even though he's not playing anymore. Always encouraged to be good citizens, do charitable events and stuff like that, and be part of the community. I think that helps to develop good, well-rounded kids, good, well-rounded citizens, and good academic athletes, which again, I think is, I can't emphasize how important that is. It's just so important that kids do that. It's already hard to be a college athlete. It's hard to make it, but it's like 1% or whatever the percentage is. I don't know, it's not much, right? That make D1. But then take the percentage of those guys that make it to, professional sports, and it's like that number becomes just infinitesimally small. So like you got to be able to fall back on something. You got to be able to fall back on your degree. Don't waste your time while you're in school. Like take advantage of that, so that you have something you can fall back on when baseball's over or sports is over. So that's the importance of that. I think there's importance in playing the game right, as far as like what the unstated rules of baseball are, right? Like playing, don't steal when you have like a 10-run lead, that kind of stuff. Not every club's teaching the kids those things, and I think they're important to be a good sport. I think the Admirals do a great job of that, Dyron in particular, and I know that he demands that of his other coaches. So that's definitely what I saw with the Admirals. And don't get me wrong, I've seen it with other clubs too. He doesn't have an exclusive to that. NorCal, which I've already mentioned, also did a great job of that. NorCal's famous for doing a prayer pre and post game for their kids. They bring them all in, have a prayer. They invite the other team, have a prayer. So the Admirals aren't the only ones that are teaching the kids well, but I've seen enough clubs that aren't doing that type of stuff, and I would much rather be associated with the Admirals and that type of thing.
And then kind of going off of that, in terms of like healthy competitive environment created amongst the Admirals, did it ever seem like it was too much of, like, I don't really want to say like toxic, but like in a way, like kind of, did it ever like gear towards that in terms of being too much of competitiveness?
If anything, at the time, I wanted us to be more competitive. Again, my son and me as a dad, we were at kind of the ground floor, and we of the Admirals when they're first starting, and we weren't the best, right? We were the underdog, and I was always encouraging Dyron, like, okay, we should try to do these things to be more competitive. We need to be at these tournaments to be more competitive. These are the types of things that we should be doing and talking to our athletes to be more competitive, as far as like, here's how you go about being seen. Here's how you go about talking to coaches. I offered to teach classes even, and have myself go up and have meetings that Dyron helped set up, where I had like entire teams in front of me and other parents, so that I could relay my experience in getting Kenny committed as a D1 athlete. And back to his story, he was committed between his sophomore and junior year of high school at Santa Clara University. He attended. He struggled academically. As a freshman at Santa Clara, it was COVID. And can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, one of my ears already died, so I'm going to just go somewhere quiet so I can switch out in case these things die. But he struggled, and, he ended up leaving the school after his freshman year. He redshirted. He ended up redshirting. The coach told him basically, like, hey, like, you struggled academically, like, he just was a mess. He ended up going to Delta College, JC, in Stockton. From there, that was for 1 year. Then he did 2 years at Sonoma State, and then ended his baseball career at USF as a grad student. So that's how he got back into the West Coast Conference. But so if anything, though, to answer your question, I was always encourage him to do things to be more competitive for our athletes, the Admirals athletes. Like, what are the tricks and tips and tricks that we can learn to get the right eyes on these kids and to just advise them what they need to do to try to make it in college sports. I don't know if he's doing those things now because I'm not there like day in and day out like I used to, but my sense is that it's a much larger club. It's a much more well-known club. It's one of the top clubs now in the area. That those hurdles, at least, like, who the hell are the Admirals? That hurdle is at least passed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that does help, I think.
And then kind of wrapping up, in terms of Coach D and the Admirals, what role did he play in your son's recruiting process, having it be something that you guys kind of started from, I wouldn't say like the ground, but like started from going from another organization to what the Admirals was?
Yeah, here, I'm going to, hold on, before I answer, I'm going to take this ear pod out because I think it's going to die, so I'm just going to switch to regular real quick. All right, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hold on a second. Yeah, that's a really good question. Darren, it was new to him. Again, Kenny was the Admirals. Again, he was on the very first team, but he was also the very first D1 athlete commit out of the Admirals. And Darren helped quite a bit, I think, kind of helping to close the deal. He was talking a lot with the Santa Clara recruiting coach. There were times where, we were still kind of wondering, like, what's up, but we didn't want to call, so we tried to get Darren to call and try to get a little more information. There's also points in the recruiting timelines, right, where coaches can't call.
Mm-hmm.
They can't initiate, but kids can, or there's a lot of communication through others. I don't know what the rules are these days. I'm sure that's still the case, I don't know what the timelines are these days, but so there's times where Darren would be the go-between. My sense is that, at this point, like, he's done this several times with probably at least a dozen kids by now, that have had these commitments. My sense is that he's gotten better at it over the years. he's starting to know like what these coaches are looking for. I think that there's been times where he's stuck his neck out for boys that haven't necessarily like panned out, and that's always hard. You don't want to vouch for someone that's going to be not that great.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think he's careful about who he's going to vouch for. It's definitely an art. It's definitely an art form. But at the same time, college recruiting, especially in baseball now, is going to be so different. There's so much. There's going to be, with these new rules and things that are going on, the transfer portal is a much much larger impact than it did previously when Kenny was growing up. The transfer portal was barely used, but ever since COVID, the transfer portal is huge with thousands of kids in it. Coaches are looking more and more towards the portal. They're looking more and more towards athletes that are older, more and more towards JUCO and D2 as feeders for their D1 programs, and I don't blame them. We've said, we've said, Kenny and my wife, and we've said over the years, like, the fact that Kenny didn't play at Santa Clara as a freshman and was redshirted was probably one of the biggest blessings that he's ever had, because it meant that he didn't waste a whole year of eligibility just to like take a few swings, because he wasn't going to start over these kids. That freshman kid at like 160 pounds or whatever the hell could not compete with the 22-year-old man at 195 who started center fielder for USF last year. He could not have competed with that kid at all. It's just not, not going to happen. To come out of high school and play at a D1 level as a freshman means you're an absolute phenom. It is becoming more and more rare. And it'd be interesting to see how that's going to change for Dyron. I think what you're going to see Dyron doing is more and more talking and developing relationships with JUCO coaches rather than D1 coaches, because that's going to be the feeder is JUCO. He's going to be talking more and more to NAIA schools and those types of programs, because those are going to be the food feeders for D1. There's going to be very few kids are going to be going straight to D1 out of high school, and I'm sure Dyron's probably already seen that quite a bit.
And then just to wrap up, what advice do you have for parents going through the travel program organization as well as having their kids start the recruiting process?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
What advice do you have for parents who have their kids going through travel ball organizations as well as starting the recruiting process?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I would absolutely advise to make sure your academics are straight, make sure you're in the gym and gaining weight and gaining strength. And the biggest thing is, and especially for parents, I have seen there are some parents out there that are like really freaking clueless. They think that their kids are like the best, they're the bomb, they're the whatever. Like, I'm sorry, but I've always had a very objective view of how my kids play, and a very realistic view of their capabilities, their strengths, and their weaknesses on the baseball field or on the volleyball court. There's parents out there that need to learn that, and I wouldn't be afraid to say something like that to a parent, like, your kid's probably not the bomb, probably not the best. Like, try to see it objectively. And the reason why that's important is because what's more important than the prestige of saying my kid's D1, and that is fun. I mean, that's fun to do. Don't get me wrong. Like when you're like your boy's a junior in high school or a senior in high school, and you're like, oh yeah, he's playing D1 next year, and you know, it's a cool freaking thing to say. But then the reality is they go to that D1 school and they don't play. They're redshirted, right? They really couldn't play because they probably couldn't compete. Then what's the use? So what I would say to parents is send your kid to where they can play. Don't be afraid of JUCO. That was Kenny's journey, and it didn't hurt him. That adversity that he went through, not playing, going back down to JUCO, getting his grades straight, figuring out how to freaking study, becoming a great academic, scholar, right? Learning how to be a college athlete, and again, playing time's important. You can't get better if you're on the bench. So don't go somewhere where that's above your head. Go where you can play, get better. It don't matter if it's JUCO. That's fine. Like, go where you can play, and then go get better, and then go find your dream. Don't just reach for the highest rung if that means sitting on the bench. It's not worth it.